Number 1. Six Flags. When I was a teenager, I got a seasonal job at a Six Flags amusement park. It was sort of the big employer in our area, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise. However, it was only open during the spring, summer, and early fall, which made it a perfect place for high school students to get their jobs at. Now, this was a while ago. I don't know if Six Flags operates like they did back then. But back then, at closing time, they did this thing they call a security sweep. The park was basically in a big circle, so to the right of the entrance, the security would sweep the park, basically forcing the customers, or guests we were supposed to call them, but I think it's rude to charge your guests admission, counterclockwise around the park, right back to the entrance. The only reason I bring this up is to explain to you what it was like when I worked there. I just happened to work at this ice cream parlor, which was the absolute last place in that counterclockwise sweep to be reached by security and customers. So because you know the park also wants to make as much money as they can, we were the absolute last place to close. So after closing, we still had to clean. Plus I had a drawer I had to take down to the cash counter. I was absolutely one of the last people to leave the park at night, and unlike others who worked in the store with me, I didn't have a car. I had to walk to the dressing room, change out the clothes, then walk out the back of the park to the bus stop. If you've never been in a big place like Six Flags after close, you probably don't know how creepy it can be by yourself. But at least you know that you're in a huge and relatively safe place. And not only was it really difficult for someone to break into an amusement park, there was security there at all times. Even the employee parking lot was caged in. But for the employees, such as myself, who took the bus to work, we had to walk through a small area in the back to a small bus stop with a bench and a light. Very few bus riders worked at night, though, because the buses in the area did not run any later than 7 p.m. So that probably makes you wonder why I was a closing employee. Well, it was the only hours they would give me, so when I was done, I would go out and call my stepdad on the telephone. He would be sleeping at the time, but he would come and pick me up and take me home before going back to sleep. This was a very late night during the summer. I can't remember exactly when it was, though, but the park was late getting closed. Tons of people rushed into the ice cream parlor at the end. We were busier than we were any other time of the day. Once the park closed, they sent me to the money counting station early, and then I still had to come back to the ice cream parlor in order to get it cleaned up. It was easily 2 o'clock in the morning by the time that I got changed and finally got out of the park. I called my stepdad, and he told me that he was on his way. So I began walking out of the employee parking area so I could head over to the bus stop. It was creepy as hell because there was no one in the locker room when I was in there. There were no cars in the parking lot. To be in such a large area, normally teeming with people, and to be so empty, was just unlike anything I can explain. I walked down the sidewalk to the bus stop. It was nothing more than a bench with one of those wind and rain guards on it. There was a dim light in the little cubby, or whatever you want to call it. I went in there, sat down on the bench, and waited. The park was only about a 15-minute drive from my house, and that was around the time that it took for my stepdad to get there and pick me up. So I just waited. The normal amount of time passed. My stepdad did not show up yet. I didn't think too much about it at first. A few minutes here and there is nothing. I'm going to try and explain how this worked. The bus stop was not down on the regular road. To get to it, you turned off the road into the back of the park. The road went slowly up the hill, stopping in a circle right where the bus stop was. So technically, there was no reason for anyone to be in that area unless they were coming to work at the park. More time passed, and my stepdad still hadn't shown up. He may have been a little late once or twice, but more and more time kept passing, and he hadn't shown up yet. This was the early 1990s, so I didn't have a cell phone. The payphone I used to call him was in the locker room. I wouldn't be able to get back in there because the door I exited was locked, so I couldn't call him and see why he hadn't arrived yet. All I could do was sit there and wait until he showed up. After waiting a while, looking down at the road, I noticed something a little strange. There was a figure walking up the sidewalk towards the bus stop. At first, the figure was something I could barely make out. I mean, it really wasn't a long road, but it was dark. And although I thought it was really weird that someone was out there walking so late, I didn't really put a lot of thought into it. But the more I kept waiting for my stepdad to show up, the more attention I paid to the figure walking toward me. I noticed that it was moving pretty slowly. He was also limping as he slowly walked closer and closer. He was wearing a long, dirty trench coat, even though it was very hot. I didn't really want to stare at him, but he was so odd. And when he got under some light, he looked even weirder. I mean, he may have been a homeless guy, and I guess he passes one if he wasn't. I watched as he stopped, and he picked up a handful of gravel from the side of the road. I found that to be really odd. As he got closer to the bus stop, I watched him make a sudden movement. I was not sure what the movement was meant to be until something hard hit the glass on the side of the bus stop. He had thrown a rock at it. I jumped. The next rock nearly struck me. "Hey, stop that," I yelled. "You almost hit me." He got closer and threw again. This time the rock hit me right in the forehead. It broke skin and was incredibly painful. I ran behind the bus stop as he kept throwing the rocks at me. As he got closer, I noticed he was wearing a rubber mask that he likely had from part of a Halloween costume. He kept throwing the rocks, hitting the glass. I then saw him draw something that looked like a knife out of his jacket pocket, and I felt my blood turn cold. The guy was distracted, though, because a set of headlights were coming up the road. I noticed it was my stepdad in his pickup truck. The guy turned and looked at the truck, and then he dropped the leftover rocks, and he ran off through the trees by the side of the road. My stepdad showed up to pick me up. I jumped in the truck and told him to drive. He asked what had happened, and I explained it to him as we drove off. It was a surreal experience. I found out that my stepdad accidentally fell back to sleep after waking up. He apologized to me, but it didn't matter. He arrived in time to help me. Number 2. Piigly Wiggly. When I got out of high school, I didn't go to college right away. I wanted to take some time off, but my parents did have a rule that if you weren't in school, then you needed to get a job. I had never had a job before, but my older brother was the manager of a bakery and a Piggly Wiggly grocery store. He was able to get me a job working in the bakery. I cannot tell you that I loved the job, but it did have its perks. I hated getting up in the middle of the night to go to work, but because the store didn't open until 7 a.m., and I got in at 2 a.m., plus it was a really small bakery, I would be the only person in the store for several hours. That I liked, even though it could be very creepy. I got to work a little bit early on the night that the story takes place. I had to make donuts before I did other things in the bakery. It was a normal night. I got to the store, I unlocked the door, and I went inside to get ready for work. I made sure to lock the door behind me. Now the lights in the entire store were out. The only ones that I ever turned on were the ones that were in the break room on one side of the store and the one in the bakery. Other than that, the entire store remained dark. I had not been in the store for a very long time when things got a little bit weird. I was by the donut fryer when I heard what sounded like some sort of yelp. and with the store being empty, the yelp echoed across the entire building. I froze when I was working on the donuts. I was supposed to be the only person in the store right now. I looked at the clock and confirmed it wasn't even 2:30 yet. I began wondering if maybe the people from the meat department had come in early. They were the only people in the store who could have gotten into the place without me knowing about it. They had the keys to the door in the back of the store, and that would be how they would get in. I wondered if I should have just assumed if it was the meat department and went on with my donut work. But then there were a couple problems with that. First of all, I didn't know for sure. Second, the yelp could have been someone crying out in pain or something for help. So I decided to go and check out and see where the noise had come from. The bakery was in the front right corner of the store. The entrance to the meat department was in the back left corner of the store. And of course, between the two places, there were aisles and aisles of product that one definitely couldn't see over in order to know if anyone was in the store. I walked down the front of the store. I planned to go to the far left aisle and then walk to the back of the store. That way, I would have a view all the way to the back of the store while I was walking down the aisle. So I walked down the front of the store, very nervous as I was doing so. Walking past each aisle, I prepared myself to jump as I was expecting to possibly see someone in the aisle. I was positive that I was just freaking myself out, as I had a tendency to do sometimes. The rational explanation for the noise was that the meat department had come in early and someone had hurt himself. That was what made sense. When I got to the final aisle, I turned, and I expected to see someone, but there was no one there. I stared across at the swinging door that led to the back, where the meat department was. I have to admit, I was very, very nervous. And again, I truly wish I could explain it to you. It wasn't just fear that I was having that particular morning. It was mounted upon the nervousness that I felt every time that I was in that huge store all by myself. I decided the best thing to do was just get it over with, so I began walking to the back of the store. Once I got to the end of the aisle, I turned and looked at the back aisle of the store, which would have been parallel to the first leg of my walk. I froze. There was someone in the store, and it was not someone that I recognized. He was sitting on the end cap of the aisle, which would have explained why I hadn't seen him when I was walking along the front of the store. He was sitting on the floor eating food and drinking soda. The food he was eating was out of a can, and it looked like he had cut his hand or something on the can. The guy looked up and saw me. I assumed at that moment that he hadn't known that anyone else was in the store. He stumbled and tried to get up. I turned, and as quickly as I could, I ran to the front of the store. I looked behind me once to see if he had followed me. Then I quickly punched in the code that allowed me to open the door that led to the employee break room. Opened the door and turned to pull it closed behind me. I noticed the guy running toward the door, but I was able to get it latched before he got there. I quickly went and called the police. The police arrived, but by the time they got to me, they had already arrested the trespasser. He had tried going out the front door and ran from them when he spotted the cop cars coming. Apparently, he had hidden himself in the store before the close the previous night. It was only a couple hours before I came in to begin the donuts, and he had thought he was alone in the store. The whole experience was really creepy, and it didn't make it any easier for me to be in the store by myself going forward. Number 3. Odie's store. This is a really old story, and I was not working when it happened. As far as I can recall, I was only about 7 years old, but I was in the store when it happened. My great aunt Odie owned a small little store out in the country, This was back in the late 70s. It was a tiny store that was likely no bigger than a medium-sized living room. The store was made of that wood that you often see old houses made of. I don't know if the wood is gray in the beginning, but it definitely was by the time that I was there. The store was in a very rural area, like I mentioned. I always enjoyed going there and getting little 10-cent boxes of candy and a bottle of Pepsi. This was back when they had those really tall pop bottles that you could return to the store after you drank them. Normally, we didn't spend a whole lot of time at the store, but there was one night when I was there, and unfortunately, it was the worst of nights to be there. This happened when my dad wanted to go out drinking with other relatives. They had no one to watch me and my cousin, so they asked my aunt if she could watch us at the store. She was more than happy to do that. For the most part, we just stayed up at the counter and talked to our aunt. She was very interesting, and even to this day, I enjoy talking to her. We had candy and Pepsi, so everything was very nice. At one point in the night, though, a very obviously drunk person came into the store. It was not unusual. People got drunk in that area all the time. It was out in the country in the 70s, and getting drunk happened to be part of the country outlaw culture. The guy staggered around the store a little bit. I could tell that my aunt wasn't completely happy about him being there. The drunk guy staggered around the store more. He picked out a drink, opened it, and began drinking it in front of us. He then grabbed a bag of chips, opening them too, and beginning to snack on them as he kept staggering around the store. I could tell my aunt was frightened a bit. I watched as she reached down and put her hands on the shotgun that she kept behind the counter. She was ready to pick it up if she needed to do it. The guy staggered to the counter and asked my aunt if he could get a pack of cigarettes, and she got them for him and put them on the counter. He also put his open food and drink on the counter. My aunt relaxed a little and seemed to have forgotten about the shotgun. While she was ringing things up, the man grabbed his items and turned to leave from the store. "You can't leave without paying," my cousin yelled at the guy. Turning back to the counter, the guy quickly dropped the items back on the counter. He then reached over, grabbed my cousin, and lifted him off of the floor. He began shaking my 8-year-old cousin violently, screaming in his face. It was very scary. Quickly I watched as my aunt quickly grabbed the shotgun, and then she pointed it at the man. She told him right away to put the kid down, or she would put him down. The guy looked at her. He didn't doubt her, not even in his drunk state. There were plenty of country women who were just as willing to use a shotgun as there were men who were too. He did the smart thing, and then he put my cousin down. He then grabbed the pack of cigarettes, taking them with him as he left the store without paying for them. My aunt took the gun to the door and watched the guy drive away. Never cross an old country woman with a shotgun. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.